welcome. I want to quickly introduce my terrific set of panelists. At the very left, we have Erica Karp, who is the CEO and founder of Cornerstone Capital. Next to her is Seth Magaziner, who's the treasurer of the state of Rhode Island. Next to him is Matthew Weatherly White, who is the managing director of the Caprock Group. And immediately to my left is Kate Walford, who is the president of the McKnight Foundation. So thank you all so much for joining us today and coming to be with us. Some of you who were here right after Tom Perez spoke during lunch, I mentioned that I thought the field was at a really important sort of watershed moment. And the sort of rationale behind this panel was to kind of see if we could pull apart some of those issues that kind of are vexing to us, challenging to us in great ways, challenging to us in hard ways, and start to pull apart some of those issues and what they may mean for the field. And sort of the idea for this discussion is really where might we be in 5 years, and how do these issues either make that path different than it would be otherwise. This is meant to be an interactive conversation. We're leaving 15 to 20 minutes for discussion. That's where the town hall piece come in, because I know I may get at some of the issues that you all are thinking about, but certainly I won't get at all of them. And it's a great opportunity to talk to sort of different parts of our sector right now about what they see happening in the part of the field that they work with. So without further ado, I want to ask you each, starting with Erica, briefly to say, when you think about where sustainable and impact investing will be in 5 years, what's the first thing that comes to your mind?
Investing, capitalism, and finance. And ultimately, hopefully, it will all be about societal impact. One thing that I would say to start is when we honestly look back over the past 20, 30 years and ask ourselves the question, have we had impact at scale through sustainable, responsible, and impact investment? We haven't. I mean, I like to be an optimist, but I'm a pragmatist. And so I would argue that to have impact at scale, we are talking about moving trillions, all right? And that's across, whether it's climate change or education, infrastructure, healthcare, dealing with income inequality, economic inclusion. We have not yet seen impact at scale through the capital markets. And we have to. And so impact at scale means business model innovation, whether it is at large companies or small. That's what I think the future is.
That was a long answer to 5 years. We got to do a lot of stuff. Okay. Seth.
Thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be here. So I got into government, and I ran for state treasurer in Rhode Island because prior to that I had worked in the SRI space at Trillium, and I wanted to bring some of the SRI principles that I had learned with a lot of the folks in this room to the public pension world and to the public funds management world. And I thought, and I still think, that there's tremendous opportunity to better integrate ESG into the public pension space. There's a lot of firepower there. There's a lot of potential there. But there are also a lot of obstacles. So I'll expand on that a little bit. But I do hope and I do anticipate that 5 years from now, 10 years from now, you'll see much broader investment, much broader engagement from the public pension world, not only on governance issues, but on environmental and social as well.
So recognizing that, as Warren Buffett said, you can be 100% right in your investment thesis and 10% wrong on your timing, and you're still 100% wrong. I'll caveat my 5-year projection.
Yeah.
The one word comes to mind: inevitability. It will be unthinkable at some point in the future, hopefully 5 years, to deploy capital with utter disregard to the environmental and social consequences of doing so.
With
utter disregard. It will be inconceivable.
Impossible. Okay, got it. Yes.
Was that a particularly complicated sentence?
Well,
Perhaps
it was for me at this point, which may not be true for everybody.
I don't know. My ludicrously expensive education suggests I should be able to construct a sentence. All right, we're good.
Okay. Kate.
I don't have the long track record of these folks, so mine is probably more point in time and then hopeful, and things that we see signs of, and they're all M's. Momentum, particularly coming out of the Paris conference, the market signals, so I hope we will see a clean trillion in real investments toward a low-carbon future. I think it's the margin to the mainstream, which really captures a lot of what we've been talking about, really that this becomes the way you do investing for long-term value and that we see more money, more products as part of those M's. And then the last is messy, which I think is some of the rigor that you talk about, is as more entrants come into the field, it is going to be messy. And so what does quality mean, and what is true adherence, and how do we measure that? So the data factor.
The messiness. It's going to be messier 5 years from now than it is now. And we think it's messy now.
Okay, so why do you think that?
Why do I think that?
Yeah.
Because of the new entrants. I think it's dislocating for what I perceive to be the sort of the tribal coherence of impact investors right now to contemplate the entrance of true mainstream investors, right? I mean, just look at the frisson around Goldman's decision to purchase, thanks, Jan, Goldman's decision to purchase Imprint and Bloomberg's decision BlackRock's decision to come to market with the rebranded SRI fund. And that heat that came off of those two decisions, it's just the beginning.
Yeah, and let me just say, because Imprint has been our consultant, I mean, we've gotten flack of
Yeah.
can you still work with them? And I'm
Because they're part of Goldman.
Yeah. And I'm like, as long as we get what we need, you bet. And they're moving things within a broader market themselves.
This goes to business model innovation. So the question of whether or not the Imprint deal was a competitive kind of preemptive strike, I mean, that we have to think about business models and what are transformations and what are not, and how fast we drive them.
So I'll jump on both of those if I can. First, I agree completely that the challenge is going to be, as there are new entrants, there are new participants, there's going to have to be a lot of questioning of old assumptions, right? And it can't just be the same old club anymore if we're really going to succeed and if we're really going to take SRI and impact to scale. It's already happening. We see mainstream players start to dip their toe in the water, and then, down to the knee, and then they're kind of getting more and more into it. And people come up to me, and I talk to, state treasurers from other states, even, some of the more conservative ones who are starting to ask, is there anything to this SRI stuff? But with that kind of success comes a higher level of scrutiny. And I think to a lot of the existing players in the space, as you are now under more of a spotlight and going to be under more of a spotlight than you've ever been before, you really have to deliver. You have to show that performance, you have to defend it, you have to demonstrate it, and you also have to, I think more than ever, question those old assumptions in the sense that, not everything that is an ESG factor is necessarily material. Many are, and we believe that, but not necessarily every single one. Not necessarily every single issue that one of your clients cares about is going to be financially material. And of those issues that are financially material, not all of them are going to be mispriced. Because as more and more players start to recognize that E and S and G factors are material, then the market will move and it'll be harder to find those mispricings. So I think it's going to be more important than ever to really be intellectually rigorous and to really come to terms with the fact that those things, those ESG factors that may have added value 10 years ago, won't necessarily add value 5 years from now as ESG goes more mainstream.
So I think it's really interesting. There are a couple language choices people have used, which is can't be same old club, tribal, and I think I know what I think you're trying to mean there, but what I can say is in almost a decade at USCIF, I feel like I've had at least 3 different jobs there. The field has changed so rapidly. And so the organization I was running 10 years ago is very different than the organization I'm running now, certainly in terms of who's at the party, certainly in terms of who's in the club. I don't feel like it's a small and constricted club anymore. I feel like there are so many people who join that. So I'm just wondering, when you use words sort of like tribal or same old club, what are we meaning by that, and what are the implications of that for the next 5 years? So Seth, I think it may have been you and Matthew who
So again, I think what we're trying to do here, what I'm trying to do, is bring ESG principles to, for example, the public pension space. And in order to do that, you have to get a lot of big players who weren't previously involved in integrating ESG into their process involved. You also want that, for our larger, more traditional partners, the big mutual fund companies and the big index fund companies and others to start doing the same. And, the circle is going to keep expanding and expanding, which is a good thing. But again, I think it also means that for those older existing players who, have been at the forefront up until now, there's going to be competition. And it's not going to be enough to be first anymore. You're still going to have to be the best if you're going to survive.
Right. Fair enough. Yeah.
If I can just say something to the messiness, when it comes to innovation, it's not just about invention, it's about process, it's about behavioral change. We're talking about changing the process, the investment process, by which people systematically start to look at environmental, social, and governance factors. It's about process innovation and behavioral change, and that's not easy. You have to move people's minds, and then you have to move their hearts, and then you have to move their guts, and it is behavioral change that is hard and messy, and just like diversity, I mean, it works better, but it's hard, it's painful while it's happening. And so that's why I think it's taking longer than it should, because we're talking about process, we're talking about power structures, we're talking about incentive structures across the different pieces of the capital markets that happily are all changing now. And we're also talking about pieces of infrastructure that have been missing until now, which is some kind of standards for disclosure around what are considered the most material ESG factors. So there's been a lot of dynamics in place that have been shifting, but finally we're kind of here when you can't fight the fact that this is better investment process.
Well, it's interesting. One of the questions I had down here was about the terms currently in use, and that Tom Perez this morning sort of preempted that when he said branding is an impediment to future growth in his view because of the various terms that are used for this field. I'm sort of non-committal about that because maybe because I sit in the middle of it, and I, as long as we define what we're saying to one another, like if I sit at a meeting, I say impact investing for us is across all asset classes for environmental and social advancement. So as long as we define ourselves to one another, we can make sure we're actually having a similar conversation. But I guess I'd like to know from whoever would like to respond to this, do you feel that the fact that we're using the term mission and sustainable and SRI and social and conscious capitalism and mission, is this confusing? Is this something, because the general marketplace may get confused, that will stop investments from happening? What's your view on that? Anyone want to take a shot at that?
It's irritating, and it does slow things down. I mean, it's irritating, right? Anything that has a value judgment built into it, any kind of language, that can be divisive, right? So we've got to get to pragmatics and enhanced analytics, and then do the process, and then align with the values of the investor. So it's irritating, and it's slowing us down. Yes.
Okay.
So here's a thought exercise. In America today, who's the most effective values-based investor? Who is unrepentant at harnessing their political capital, their philanthropic capital, their personal capital, and their commercial capital? The Koch brothers. They are. They control the conversation, and yet we talk amongst ourselves as if we are the values aligners. We're the ones who have the right values, and I think that kind of terminology is tribal, right? It's how we define ourselves. It's the great shibboleth that identifies those of us who are inside the tribe. I mean, and it's complicated though, because I don't know how we get away from that terminology so that we can communicate with each other really clearly. I don't know. Maybe you have an answer. What's the lack of irritant?
The lack of irritant is using language that's about finance, or language that's about business, or language that's about your clients first, And again, it's the divisiveness and the politicization that I think has slowed us down. It doesn't have to be that way, It's investing. It's finance.
Well, if it was, though, investing, we would have more than 20% of assets there. So we've got a ways to go, right? And
we've got a long way to go.
I understand
Absolutely.
what you're saying, but I think that the notion that sustainable is a values-based word, we've pushed out the idea that we want to put
it
is
right.
Well, it is, but what
sustainable
isn't?
corruption,
What isn't a
sustainable
values-based
hypocrisy,
word?
sustainable
Right?
To claim it.
Sustainable obfuscation is not okay. It's sustainable, right? It's incredibly pragmatic to take all the resources of the planet and destroy them and use them now. It's very pragmatic. It makes sense. And it appears to be that's what's sustainable now. We need to go beyond sustainability, right? We need to go to regenerative and inclusive. So again, any language that is in finance, in investing, that's not pragmatic. So it's about value rather than values as a starting point. And I think that's where the language...
I'm just going to argue with the fact that you can devalue language, because when we use the term long-termism, we're saying that is better. Yeah. We are valuing that. That is a financial term. So short-termism is a financial term. So I guess in a way I'm more concerned about do we need to bring a construct around a terminology so that when I say to Kate, hey Kate, do you do impact investing? You can say, hey Lisa, yeah or no, because she knows what the hell I'm talking about. Because she's not going to know until she says to me, well, what are you talking about? So maybe we come back to this towards the end, because I think there are issues related to values, non-values, politics, non-politics, finance language, non-finance language, and just a definitional neatness that are being collapsed on top of each other.
So let me just break in for a minute. As kind of the, the resident politician in the room, and I use words all the time to try to get people to do what I want them to do. There is no doubt in my mind that when you frame language in a way that implies that you are holier than everyone else, that you're responsible and therefore others are irresponsible, there are people who will respond negatively toward that. And as I'm trying to get other state treasurers or members of my investment committee to get more comfortable with ESG integration and engagement and advocacy, my experience has been that the language that tends to get the farthest with folks who are skeptics is talking about risk, making sure that we understand that we need to guard against environmental risks, social risks, and governance risks that the market is not adequately appreciating. So talking about risk, and then also talking about investing for the long term rather than the short term. I manage a pension fund. We have an unlimited lifespan and a multi-decade time horizon. The average CEO of a publicly traded company does not have a 30 or 40 or 50-year time horizon. So I'm one, maybe it's just out of expedience, but I don't tend to be somebody who gets hung up on wanting to use whatever language, has the most sentimental value or has the most meaning to me. Use the language that's going to convince other people that you're right, and use the language that's going to convince other people to do the things that you want them to do. So my experience, again, has been that talking about risk goes a long way, and talking about misalignments of time horizon goes a long way with folks who are skeptical.
So that brings me to a question I had for you, Seth, which was, when you look at the involvement of pension funds, I think there's this outside notions of what public pension funds do based on a few of them that have been incredibly active, at least on a particular number of issues. And to the degree that, for example, pension funds at the Council of Institutional Investors are doing work, they're doing it around the G and generally a very limited number of governance issues. So, if I was to bring you into a room right now of public pension funds and say, bring them forward to a place where they would want to move beyond governance and look at a range of other environmental, social issues, whether it's looking at how they're investing in terms of the funds they're investing in and the companies they're investing in, or engaging in shareholder work, how would you try to convince them? What do you think are the two biggest barriers keeping them from moving into the space more quickly?
So there are a couple of significant barriers to getting public pension funds to do more. There are governance barriers, right? So as state treasurer in Rhode Island, I'm not a sole fiduciary, but I'm pretty close. I've got an investment committee. I appoint a majority of the members to the investment committee, therefore I have a fair amount of influence. That's more than many state treasurers have. Oftentimes, you'll have structures where there are multiple stakeholders, a governor, a legislature, unions, retiree groups, who are all appointing members of investment committees, and you don't always have a governance structure where it's easy to get in and kind of push change, right? So there are some large public pension funds that have a sole fiduciary model where the state treasurer, the comptroller, what they say goes. There are others, like my situation in Rhode Island, where it's not quite that far down that, that spectrum, but it's pretty close. And then there are some, New York City, their pension is split into 5 different pieces, each with their own board and like 50 different board members in total, right? So that's one challenge, is just the governance challenge. And some of the more progressive fiduciaries in the public pension space have more ability to drive change than others. Then, on top of that, those that are interested in driving change, you've got term limits, you've got people who get in and then after a few years decide they want to go run for other offices. And so that's tough too, just when you think that you've educated somebody and that you've got them interested and they're bought into integrating ESG and they're going to partner with you on shareholder engagement, then they're gone and somebody else is coming in. So talking about messiness, just the governance and the politics around it are very, very messy. The opportunity, I think, comes back to the fact that, again, pension funds are the ultimate long-term investor. I mean, somewhere in Rhode Island right now, there is a 22-year-old teacher in his or her first year of teaching. Retirement is the last thing on that teacher's mind right now, but that person is still going to be drawing a pension from our system 80 years from now. And so arguments around aligning incentive structures and aligning time horizons in a more sustainable way and pushing boards of directors and executives to think on a 30, 40, 50, 60-year time horizon, I think that's an argument that's very hard for any pension fiduciary to ignore. So again, I think it's really just about packaging the message in the right way and selling it the right way.
So let's move over to another asset owner, which are foundations. And so I'm going to direct this to Kate, but both Eric, I think, and Matthew both work with foundations to some degree, so I'll be interested in having you jump in. But foundations have been undertaking PRIs, program-related investments, for a long time, but they've been a little bit late to the party on mission or sustainable investment. And of course, the Ford Foundation recently committed, though has not yet moved, to my understanding, on committing part of its endowment to sustainable approaches. And Darren Walker at the Mission Investors Exchange meeting said, and I quote, "We must interrogate our own practices and our own way of working. If we do, we can fundamentally change philanthropy from the top down and the bottom up." I know McKnight is already allocating part of its endowment, and we want to hear more about that. But first, I want to get a sense from you of why you think foundations, which are generally mission-based institutions, values-based institutions at some level, have been slow to transform.
So I think fundamentally, foundations see themselves as philanthropic actors. And so this program-related investment space is kind of a very comfortable space because it's low interest, concessionary, and you can tie very high program impact. So it adds another tool to the toolkit alongside the grant making. I don't think by and large most foundations really think about their role as an institutional investor and how that understanding can fuel social change and advance their missions and provide better alignment between what they say they are about through their missions with what actually turns out to be holdings in their endowments that, as we discovered in our case, actually some of them were working at cross purposes. So I think that's in kind of broad brush. I do think there are real exceptions. The Heron Foundation, 100% now, because they will say investing is investing and it all has an impact. You can just decide whether it's a positive or a negative impact, but it all has impact. There are some other really creative examples, but they're still at the margins. I would say, at least in US foundations, we need to see more dollars deployed against, and we need to see more proxy and shareholder action. We need to see a lot more work in the public equity space, kind of activating the entire endowment.
And you think that's where most foundations would, of course, start, is in the public equities?
I think most foundations really want that kind of niche-y, high impact, very aligned with often, 15 different things that are part of their program endeavors, which makes it very hard, one, to scale, and very hard to find a public equity or a fund that actually can meet all those purposes. So we've done a really pragmatic approach, a 10%, where a lot of that we're trying to drive either at market rate benchmarks or at concessional, directly aligned with our climate grant making and our water quality work. But then we're also trying to align more and more of the rest of the portfolio with environmental, social, and governance, and have processes and practices as we relate to all our managers. I hope we'll see more of that, but I do have to say I still get cross-eyed looks from many of my peers when I talk about their role as institutional investors. So I think we got work to do on that.
This is an issue of governance like anything else. I mean, I've said that in the E and the S and the G is first among equals, it's governance. And so when we look at the structure of foundations, the investment committees, the composition of the investment committees, and having the confidence to get beyond the fact, and thanks to the Secretary of Labor, we have gotten beyond the fact that you can and in fact should look at ESG factors. But so when we look at the governance, the investment committees, again, who's on them, and their level of confidence in integrating effectively ESG across the portfolio, that's where we have work to do. We have a study out it's in the public domain. We worked, Cornerstone worked with a group from MIT, and we looked at the largest foundations in the world and the extent to which their investment policy statements their mission. Remember, these are tax-advantaged organizations, but you look at the alignment. And if, again, we are talking about impact at scale, there really are no fundamental barriers right now from aligning the entire portfolio, but it is, small steps that we have to take, and it's building confidence. The vast majority of the empirical research on performance shows us that there's no outtrade. You don't have to give up the performance, all right, to look at ESG factors. Now we have the proof that, there can be the alignment, and we have the studies that show it. And now it's about process, again, and governance. And so I think I am loath to use the expression inflection points, because, they're very rare, that infinite rate of change. But I think we maybe are as close as I'm willing to say that we are at an inflection point to be able to align mission with money, and then with all the foundations and all the quantum of capital, we can start moving it towards impact more quickly.
One thing that's changing is more millennials, especially in family foundations. That was our case, trustee, bringing it to the forefront. And interestingly enough, all of you should be on foundation investment committees, because I've also noted where there are folks who really have deep experience, practitioner, can bring the research to bear. That has actually moved a couple of very significant foundations, just helped kind of create that comfort level. And then those of us who don't have chief investment officers who are remunerated at different scales also have an easier cultural time kind of having everybody see their role as advancing mission, no matter what side of the house they're on.
I got to throw in one other thing. If you look at the composition of the investment committees on the largest foundations, the extent to which it is financial services experts or practitioners that are on those committees, it's notable, it's potentially challenging. It's consistent with the extent to which the economy is driven by financial services, when theoretically financial services should only be a facilitator of real economic growth. So you've got some of these structural issues in what I would call the governance of the space that are slowing us down. But I think we are really making progress, thanks to Clara Miller and Heron and yourself.
Do you have anything?
It just seems like a reductionist perspective, but aren't institutions almost by definition loath to change? I mean, maybe that's way too reductionist, but that's the challenge, right?
Well, I think part of the issue, though, is people are loath to change when they feel that it's a scary thing.
Yeah.
But it seems to me we have enough examples now of foundations and other actors who are doing this. I know when Ellen Dorsey of Walls Global Fund did this for the first time, she spent half of her next year on the phone with foundations who said, oh my God, how did you do this big and scary thing? Which, when it's actually broken down, is not so big and scary.
Yeah, and
right?
To your point, when we have had foundations call us sort of on a consulting basis almost, just to talk them through what it might look like to embrace some form of conversion cadence over time, what always happens is you say, well, that's much easier than we thought.
Right.
And I think that the capacity for demystification cannot be underestimated.
Well, and also, I think that makes sense. That was good.
Okay.
I think, but I also think sometimes the capacity.
The rest was crap, but that was good.
All right, well, moving right along. But the capacity for demystification is really.
Cold.
It was. We're just going to move along. You can all talk about it later at the bar. It's really about. Sometimes it takes one person. I mean, one of the challenges we have oftentimes, I look at it among my own membership, I look at it in other places, is oftentimes if the leadership isn't coming from the top, if it's not you or Darren Walker or someone running a Fortune 500 who says, we want to embed this in our practice, you've got a big institution with 3 or 4, maybe 15 people pushing change. That is really hard to incrementally push out from the middle. But it's really not, when you bring in one person who really believes it and they have the power and the leadership capacity, even if they don't have the top job to move it along, I don't care if it's a foundation or a company or an investment firm, that can happen. The switch gets pushed.
This is the Clara Millers of the world. This is leadership. And Matthew, I was teasing Lisa, not you, right?
Oh, that I was
comment.
crap?
No. Just a little levity. But what you're talking about is leadership, right?
Yeah.
And so it is. It's the Darren Walkers and the Clara Millers that are stepping in to say, I've got the guts to change. And it's talking about changing entrenched power systems, whether it's kind of hard or soft power. But that's leadership. And happily, you know, we have examples of leadership right here. So.
Well, I mean, I think Seth is, you know, we've got Teresa Whitmarsh speaking tomorrow morning from the Washington State Investment Board, who's interested in moving having more knowledge about ESG, and Kurt Summers is coming back from Chicago, who's the treasurer, is trying to do more of that. But what is the role that someone like you, in all of your spare time running a state treasury office, could take in kind of, and you and others could bring your experience, bring your thoughts to a broader range of treasurers and help them move along? Like, what would that take? Is it a couple of great case studies? Is it just sort of walking them through your experience? What would that take?
I think it's a
Can I
couple of
augment
things.
Can I augment that question
Yeah.
for you as well?
Sure.
So what I think I heard you say was that your primary responsibility is this long-term asset liability matching exercise, right?
Yep.
Is that okay?
Partly,
That is
yeah,
what
in
that
part,
is.
yeah.
Okay. So to that extent, how do you guys think about incorporating ESG or whatever in that? Because it strikes me from the outside that if somebody came to you with like this wickedly cool impact investment that happened to help you solve that long-term asset liability matching exercise, then would there be an institutional objection to it?
Yeah. I'll take sales pitches later after the
not-
panel. But no, I'm kidding.
I teed this up for all of you guys.
There are three. Yeah, I'll leave a stack of cards by the door. And, there are three things that I think I can do and that I can try to, and that I am trying to do. The first is, you know, I certainly want to be an advocate and an evangelist for ESG integration and especially shareholder advocacy amongst my peers. So when I'm not coming to SRI conferences, I'm going to state treasurers conferences, and I'm, you know, trying to twist the ears of my colleagues. And, you know, I certainly have been able to get some interest, and I think it's a process, though. It's an education process. Part of the way you do that also is by getting involved in specific things, right? It's not necessarily, hey, would you think about, you know, becoming an ESG investor? It's, hey, I'm working on, you know, with a couple of other investors on advocating on X issue at Y company, will you come join us with that? And, you know, that kind of gets them a little more comfortable. And you do a few of those and they say, hey, have you thought about how to integrate this into your investment process? And so sometimes it's more about getting them involved in kind of small ways and then, you know, trying to build that into something larger over time. So certainly the first thing I can do with the three is to just be an advocate and evangelist among my peers and other state treasurers. Second, I can come back to you all and tell you, now that I'm on this side of the fence, what would be useful that you all could do that could help us out in the public pension space. And I'll give one example that I've been giving at every event like this that I've been to for the last year and a half, is somebody needs to develop a target date fund for me. Because the public pension fund world is moving increasingly, for better or worse, away from defined benefit to either hybrid or defined contributions, where you have unsophisticated investors who want to have a target date fund that kind of shifts automatically from equity to more fixed income and cash over time. Not only important in the pension world, but also the 529 college savings space, which is a multi-billion-dollar industry, also run largely by state treasurers, also one where people, by and large, prefer target date funds. If there is somebody out there who's offering a good SRI target date fund, I haven't seen it yet, so actually come see me afterwards on that one.
I saw a lot of note-taking when you
Yeah.
said that.
So, but this is one of the things that I can do, is to come back and say, hey, if you really want to get more involved in the public space, these are the kinds of products that are growing, that are desired, that people want. But the third, and I think the most important thing, more than communicating with my peers, more than communicating with all of you, is trying my best to lead by example. So I'm trying my best to lead by example. We just launched for the state of Rhode Island our new proxy voting policy, the first proxy voting policy that we've had that really integrates ESG principles, basically largely based on the ISS SRI policy with some tweaks and some customizations. We are looking toward the next proxy season at trying to get involved in putting some of our own things on the ballot. We've added ESG products to our defined contribution plan for the pension, to our 529 plan for the college savings. So I'm trying my best in Rhode Island to do what I can to lead by example, while also communicating with my colleagues and communicating with all of you.
So thank you. That's very specific and very helpful. So I'm going to throw two sort of issues together, and these are things that when we look at where the field is right now, we're concerned about, want to do something about. It's one of the reasons USCIF sort of has decided to take a strategic goal of enhancing rigor in the field. We did a report on ESG integration when we saw such a big jump in the number in our trends report. And we looked at the 16 largest money managers who responded to our report and also filed PRI transparency reports because we could get good data there. And what we found out is that of the 16, only 8 of them really did a systemic and transparent process of ESG integration, of defining what the ESG issues were, and of making that available for public understanding. And so we think that's problematic. We think that the use of ESG integration as a descriptor without any kind of requirements about sharing, whether that's across all asset classes, whether it's a range of ESG issues, what those ESG issues are, and whether it's a true process, or it's sending information about a company to every portfolio manager who can delete it or use it, which is more like information sharing. And so, when we think about that, we have some ideas about how to address that. But I'm curious about those of you who are particularly working in the public equities market. How do we work on issues like ESG integration? If we want ESG to be part of the financial system, how do we make sure it's part of the financial system in a meaningful way?
We think a lot about materiality, and I think that you scratch an inch deep and you run instantly into materiality. And when I look at the way, for example, Sustainalytics works and their system of sort of volume-based evaluative matrix around sustainability reporting, it doesn't make any sense to me, which is why I think sometimes you end up with these real head-scratchers in the top 10 holdings for a lot of the really committed, interesting, progressive SRI and ESG mutual funds, because the system, it doesn't actually work. So when you talk about integrating ESG, so the big question is, okay, what and how, and do the existing systems really support that? And this might be a tangent, but I think that one of the challenges is that much of it is based on that sort of 1970s ethic around, if you are transparent, by definition, you are good. And therefore, you want to encourage transparency because it means you're good. But I think what's happened is that ethos has been hijacked by corporations who have said, hey, we'll just disclose everything. We've got 900 things we're going to be reporting on. That means we are so cool. And it's just not true. I would much rather see a company report 3 material factors that are operationally critical to the sustainability of the enterprise than 500 metrics that are effectively irrelevant, although they might be very important to a values-aligned community. That's one, and for what it's worth, I think what SASB is doing is really cool. I mean, if we're not all backing SASB, then we're missing out on a huge opportunity to push this whole discipline forward. That's my take. And Eric is on the board of directors.
Thank you for that shout out. So yes,
yeah.
Speaking with my SASB hat, the idea of having sector and industry specific disclosures and looking at materiality by industry, by sector, really matters a lot. So thank you for that. And that goes back to the discussion about having a common language. And by the way, in terms of the number of metrics and measures on sustainability, I don't think 3 is the right number, but I don't think 900 is the right number. So it's someplace in between. And I would add that when it comes to working, we work very closely with corporations who are in earnest trying to align their business, trying to be transparent about the potential for transformation and transparency. I don't so much agree that just by virtue of saying I'm transparent, I'm good. That I don't agree with. We can be perfectly transparent about being really, really bad. But I think what really is important is that we allow the companies the freedom, the flexibility to transition. We are talking about a board level transformation from the board down and the bottom up, aligning the mission, the measures, the metrics, the accountability, incentive structures. It is systems level change that we need, and it is a process. And so with regard to materiality, probably the best study you should all look at is from Seraphim, the more recent study than the Eccles study that talks about really first evidence of materiality. And we know that those companies, or it appears from this study, that those companies that are really good about disclosing stuff that really doesn't matter for economic and financial outcomes, they actually appear to underperform, right? So how do we tell the difference between corporate greenwashing crap and true corporate transformation and earnest disclosure. The one thing, if I had to say one word, look for consistency, all right? Look for them to disclose the right things that identify who they are and if they care about transformation from top to bottom. The board level discussions now about putting in place the right KPIs, this is a really serious, earnest discussion, and we're not there yet. It's still early days on integrated financial reporting, but we're making real progress, and it's a piece of infrastructure that's been missing, and it's here now. So early days, but we're getting there.
Kate, do you want to talk a little bit, before we're going to open to questions right after this, so if you have questions, you might want to start lining up at the mics. Can you talk a little bit about how the McKnight Foundation thinks about your points of leverage, which you've talked a little about with me, and how that has helped you approach your endowment?
Yeah, so we basically have a $2 billion endowment. We have a 10% carve out, which is really trying to be not only mission aligned, but direct to our program goals. And again, much of that at market rate, so not all concessionary. But we also said, how do we activate the entire portfolio? So we talk about, and these are things that are not new to you, but again, not always the way we talk about it in philanthropy. We talk about ourselves as a customer of financial services. And so we do interrogate every manager around ESG, and it's very fun to watch my investment chair become more and more animated and get greater depth in his questions each time we do it, and the manager's actually responding to that. We talk about our role as owner of assets, so the opportunity that we have to actually direct investments into things that we truly believe advance our mission. We also talk about our role as a market participant, so climate is a really big issue for us. We're part of the ICNR, so INCR, thank you, all these acronyms. At Ceres, which gives us a way to engage with the SEC on disclosure, things that, again, normally a philanthropy wouldn't necessarily think of as a way for us to help, again, with market making. And then we also talk about our role as a shareholder, so we vote our proxies on every actively managed account. All of that for us is kind of just is pretty pragmatic. We try it. It doesn't hurt. You know, it doesn't take a whole lot of time. We can actually see incredible leverage. And so I feel like, you know, my role is it's not evangelizing. It's actually just telling, you know, again, it really isn't that hard. I find now all my board members want to come to investment committee meetings. They're much more interesting because we're really talking about how do we advance our mission and optimize the use of all of our resources. So I think by talking about those leverage points, you can do that whether you're small, medium, large size. Those are opportunities that we all have by virtue of having these endowments, and how do we activate more of those resources. Right. So for us, it's been powerful to talk about roles as well as deploying actual dollars.
Right, and what's interesting is that in a way there's so much that's being left on the table by foundations, family offices, other asset owners around what the uses they could put these investment dollars to. So anyway, I know we have a couple people lined up there. I think it's Tim, but I can't really see. Is that you, Tim? Okay.
Tim Smith with Walden Asset Management, and a question for Seth and a quick comment. Seth, thanks for announcing the new proxy voting guidelines that you talked about. I had read that the state of Rhode Island was one of the few states that actually voted no on boards without adequate diversity. Is it like you need to have 25% on the board of diversity to be able to vote for the board? So I wondered if you could talk about that, because I think you and Massachusetts are the only two states to do it. It's a very important message. But I did want to just say, in response to Erica's point, in the sort of the disparaging of companies that go beyond disclosure on material items, I don't think that's a uniform view in our community. I think there's many, many investment firms that really want to see companies both start off with disclosing material things, but disclose what's important too. So General Motors, who's here as a sponsor, just came out with its sustainability report, and it probably does have 75 items that it talks about. That doesn't mean it's junk. It means that they're being responsive to issues that are important to their stakeholders, as well as the issues that investors need to know. You're absolutely right, to make investment decisions. So I'd like to keep that debate point open. SASB will serve us very well by bringing materiality to the fore and giving us sector guidelines, but they won't serve us well if they try to say issues that are exceedingly important to our community, like political spending disclosure, because they're not material, shouldn't be disclosed. So I just want to make sure that's on the record. But,
By the way, one person's materiality is not necessarily another's, as it relates to political spending, as it relates to diversity. So again, this is where we have to be flexible to some degree, and this is where we get to align values and value.
So
Seth?
let me break it. Yeah, actually, I would like to comment briefly on both things. So first, yeah, I'm very proud of our new board diversity policy. It's a 30% threshold. Rhode Island will be voting no on any board slate that is less than 30% women or minority. 30% because my friend, the treasurer of Massachusetts, Deborah Goldberg, did a 25% threshold, and so I told her I have to beat her. And then she said that if I did higher than 25, she'd have to go higher too. So Deborah, game on. But this also gets to the challenges too. I mean, I did this because I believe it's the right thing to do, and I think it'll help us, certainly financially in Rhode Island, as well as helping advancing the cause of diversity socially. But I got torn to shreds on talk radio in Rhode Island for weeks after I did that, and a lot of folks in public office are more sensitive to that kind of thing than I am. So that's another barrier to getting public pension funds more involved in this space. And I'd just say briefly too on the issue of materiality. I mean, I agree with both of you. I mean, from an investor point of view, I as the manager of a pension fund now, and then also putting on my former hat as when I was an analyst at Trillium. There's no such thing as too much information. You want to get your hands on as much information as you can when you're analyzing a company or a fund. But where I think we are at our best as a community in SRI is when we are having tough conversations and doing tough analysis, trying to decide what's material and what is not. I think when we're at our worst is when we integrate laundry lists into the investment process without really thinking too hard about it. So the more information that's publicly available, the better. But then the more rigor and the more analysis and, frankly, the more skepticism that goes into, okay, which of these things actually matter materially and financially, the better also, in my opinion.
Thank you.
And Tim, thank you for bringing that up. I think we so often focus on the how, we forget about the why. Mm-hmm. And I love Tim because he and a handful of other people have always this beautiful, gentle, embracing capacity to say, don't forget about the why. So thank you.
Okay. Simon, I think.
Hi, Simon Billiness, CSR Strategy Group. I also have a question for Seth, because I think you're probably unique in being a state treasurer who, before being elected state treasurer, had a background and worked within the SRI industry at Trillium Asset Management. I was wondering if you could like speak further to the different opportunities and constraints there are as in the working in the SRI industry and then being an elected state treasurer.
That's a big question. I don't want to take too much time. Yeah, as far as I'm aware, I'm the first elected state treasurer who comes from an SRI background, but I better not be the last. Exactly. Thank you. I think the challenge, the biggest difference is I have to now make the case to a broader array of stakeholders, right? Mm-hmm. Even in Rhode Island, where I have more agency over investment decisions than a lot of state treasurers around the country do, I've got to work with our investment committee. I've got to work with members of the legislature who are kind of banging down the door saying, hey, what are you doing? The unions and retiree groups, many of whom are, very progressive and very open-minded, but, unlike your average SRI fund, I mean, they are not in the pension fund necessarily by choice. They are as a consequence of their job, right? I have a monopoly on state pensions in Rhode Island, and they can't, go somewhere else if they disagree with what I'm doing. And so, working with the representatives of the unions and the retiree groups to educate them on what we're doing and why is a big challenge. There's just a very large community of stakeholders in the public pension space, many of whom are skeptical or afraid or really just have no idea what ESG is. And so that's the bigger challenge, is that I'm not doing a lot of preaching to the choir in my new role. I'm preaching to a lot of the unconverted, and even in a blue state like Rhode Island, that can be challenging.
Great, thank you. Next question. Meredith.
I'm Meredith Benton. I'm with Sonnen Capital and also on the USF board.
Talk a little louder.
Always. So one of the things I think USF has a role in doing is visioning where the field might go. And to the point that Erica brought was around scale. And then I look at this panel and I see a foundation and I see a state treasurer, and I think about all of the opportunities that we have to connect what a foundation is able to do to scale the industry to the side where the state treasurer doesn't have to fight quite so hard to bring the products to those that you need to convince. So the question that I have is around some of these issues where we're still building out more services, so not climate change, things like poverty alleviation. How can there be a connection and a collaboration between the foundation space and between the more institutional investments? And is there a timeline that we might consider? How are we able as an industry to enable those products to actually come to market and to come to scale?
Do you want to start?
So, I mean, again, we're talking about a systems level problem, right? And so you know that complex problems can't be solved sequentially with one piece at a time. So we do need all of us working together. But you have to make a decision, take the call. Do we as a group believe that capitalism is the best system, right? By the way, the numbers will show you that millennials on average, about 18%, only 18% think that capitalism is good, all right? So keep that in the back of your mind, all right? So, but if we as a group say, okay, it's good, then we have to talk about aligning the different pieces, and then you have to start analyzing, for instance, when it comes to the issue of income inequality, all right? You have to take that big issue and see what does it mean, what are the questions that should be asked through the capital markets, through each of the players, through the corporations, and do we want to deal with it? Do we give a damn? And if we give a damn, well, then you start as an investor knowing what questions to ask which companies that are involved in the different sectors. So if it's the restaurant industry, let's talk about the economics of automation in the restaurant industry and what that means to the workforce. Let's talk about education. Let's talk about infrastructure. It's not a simple answer, but if we get, again, the capital markets working in the same direction through intelligent questioning, we can make real progress together. And I actually think we're doing it. You know?
Does anyone else want to respond quickly to that?
Yeah, I do think the climate space has given us some sense of how to build out some of these ecosystems where you really do see foundations and pension funds working together on some of these issues, and a broader set of actors where there are really good connecting points. I think we need to see more of those.
And
2 weeks ago,
that on gender lens investing,
2 weeks ago
for example,
was
these thematic approaches.
the Mission Investing Conference, which 2 years ago when I was there, it was primarily about these concessional, just one part of the capital stack and how that could be deployed. This last conference, twice as many foundations present, and really talking about all asset classes, talking about different tools, talking about how we can start stimulating more product creation. I mean, McKnight helped seed a $100 million carbon efficiency strategy with one of our asset managers. We'd been with them 30 years. We didn't want to just walk away and divest. We said, what can you come up with to meet our needs? And I think we need to see some more of that where, we're willing to just get in there, and when we see an opening, just be willing to help innovate, but again, trying to drive it to more scale, which for us, $100 million is a pretty big investment in something new.
So we have 3 people standing. So what I'm going to do is ask each of you to just give us your question, and then we're going to take all 3 of them and try to answer them before we have to close in about 5 minutes. Okay, so if we can start on that side and then come over here to Gary.
Hi, thank you for the great conversation. Eleni Zanis with New York City Economic Development Corporation. So I'll ask a question, changing a bit the, maybe asking the entrepreneurs on states to wear a different hat. Part of our work in impact investing is to support intermediary funds and other businesses that are trying to change the behavior in markets. So I would love to hear from you, what is the most exciting thing about running a business that's solely focused on impact, and what's also the greatest challenge, and what do you see as a solution to that challenge?
Okay, that's 3 questions.
Yes, okay.
So,
wow.
Okay, so I'm going to take one of those.
It's a 2-word answer.
Wait,
jobs.
No.
Jobs.
We're taking all 3 questions
jobs.
first. Okay, so Michael, your question.
I'm Michael Lent, Veriswealth Partners. The panel spoke a little bit about SASB, measuring materiality. I'd like to hear something about, there's a lot of debate, discussion about what impact are we really having and how we measure that. And there's this, there's attempts to standardize impact through various measures. And USIF did a study several years ago. It's being updated on looking at the whole of all the toolkit, the strategies, and how they impact. Could panelists comment on where you see this going over the next several years? What's important to measure, from both an output and an outcome standpoint?
And Michael, are you talking about across asset classes?
Yeah.
Okay. Gary?
Gary Matthews, SRI Investing in New York. Erica, I'd like to hear you unpack a little bit more your distinction between values and value. It seems to me the SRI community is always, as well as any diverse community, has a diverse set of values that they bring to the table and are seeking to have reflected in their investment process. And I'm a little bit skeptical about whether those diverse values can be ever distilled down into one concept of value. I'd like to hear more about that.
Okay, so do you want to take that really quickly, and then we'll have those other two questions?
As a financial executive, my job is to help create value around your values. Okay? You decide what the values are. If you like smoking, drinking, gambling, and firing guns, so be it. You might not want to work with our firm. That said, my job is to help create financial and economic value. And by the way, economic value, that's a whole different discussion. And I would say, back to the first question, when it comes to impact, speaking as an entrepreneur, what it feels like to create jobs from nothing, truly to get the economic multiplier effect going again in the capital markets, there's nothing that feels like that. And so if we want to measure impact, how many jobs can we create? How many assets under management can we move to asset managers that integrate? How many companies can we help finance that are having societal impact? Impact at scale. We can measure it, but we can't pretend to have a false precision around the ability to measure. Right? So that's part of the conversation.
Yeah, so these are all separate conversations. We haven't gotten to policy. I've only seen like 5 questions that have been able to ask it, but you don't want to say 7. I think it's right. But anyway, so then I'm going to throw out sort of a combination of 1 and 2 to you, which was, what is the most exciting thing about working in a sort of impact-only firm, and or at least your piece of it, and then what impact are we really having? I'd like to have a couple people talk about that. Okay, I can see her chomping at the bit now, but here we go.
Who's chomping at the bit? Me?
Yeah.
I'm an entrepreneur. The Capital Group is my 4th company that I started, and since I started the Capital Group, I started 2 other ones. It's like this genetic mutation that I have. And I'm not actually as excited as Eric is about job creation as much as I am about problem solving. What really gets me up in the morning is this notion that with the collaborative work of myself and handful of people, we can identify that fund and scale solutions to problems. That's not true. That's just that makes crack look like sand. I didn't say that.
I think you just tweeted it.
Wow. Chasmouth rules retroactively apply to that statement.
That'll work here.
Yeah. Are we having the impact that we're having? That is an entire panel. We've spent 7 years breaking our brains on an impact assessment and reporting tool that we launched recently at iCarbonImpact.com. If you're interested in looking at it, that's the public-facing website. And we think we've gotten pretty close to it. And I'll rest.
He's quite celebratory of this. I think it's the first time he's ever been excited about a reporting system. But we've spent 7 years on this and well over $1 million. And it's like, and we're just a tiny team. Like, what do you do if you're really trying to do this at scale and solve in the public equity market? Yikes.
No, and I think, one of the interesting things about this impact report we'll put out next month, which I would love to have the broadest possible comment on it from all of you, so when we rewrite it again in 2 or 3 years, we have your input, is that the impacts are diffuse and they're across a whole range of actors and activities, and they change over time. I spent 10 years doing international development. The impact we thought we had, for example, by taking children away from making soccer balls in Pakistan and putting them in a factory meant that women stopped working. Like that was not part of the idea, but that's what the impact, the secondary impact was. And so part of it also is we have this notion we're going to measure impact tomorrow, and it's the same 6 months down the road, and a year down the road, and 2 years down the road. And yes, this is a whole conversation in and of itself. We'll do that next year. Thank you all. Thank you to this panel. I really enjoyed talking with you, and thank you for being here. Thank you.